Og selvom jeg er dansk, så gør jeg det på engelsk, så jeg er sikker på, at I så mange som muligt forstår mig. Så som sagt, Claus Olesen, I'm the CEO of Initiator Pharma, which now is a clinical stage company. And today I'm just going to go back a little bit in the story, just telling you what is we do, what we have in the pipeline, and then just a brief update on the ongoing phase 1 trial that we have. So you can say company brief, who are we? Well, we are a Danish clinical stage company. As I said, we are a spin-off from Saniona originally. That means that actually majority of the assets we have in our pipeline was actually assets that we acquired from Saniona, and through Elixir distribution of the shares, we actually got a company that had more than 3,500 shareholders from the beginning of the company. We are listed on Spotlight Stock Market under the name of Init, and we have our first asset, the EPD 2015, is in phase 1 clinical trial for erectile dysfunction, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. And then we are actually on the trajectory to actually generate this proof of concept for a potential blockbuster drug. And when I say blockbuster, that's more than $1 billion in sales annually. So I think that we are a really high valuable company, and we are driving something towards the clinic that there's a high unmet need for. A little bit of the ownership of the company. So right now we have a current market cap of about 160 Swedish. And you can look here in the slide, and you can also see it in the quarterly reports. You see a lot of 76% of our shareholders actually has more than 20,000 shares in the company, and we can see that a lot of these medium-sized shareholders are actually acquiring more shares, believing in that the development we are taking as a company. We have about 62% of our shareholders are from Sweden, and then we have about 25% in the Nordic countries outside. And there's been a little bit of push to be getting more Danes and more Norwegian investors into the company. And we also take that as a strong sign that actually we see Denmark is catching up a little bit to the Swedes, but majority of the investors are still Swedish. And you can see on the right left-hand side of the screen, actually, if you look at the names and some of the companies you might know, but I think it's important here to say that all the co-founders of the company still retain all their shares from the beginning. Even that our lockup is no longer in place, we all maintain our shares, and we've been following and contributing in each round of financing, showing that we believe very much in the company. But going to the pipeline that I talked about before, so the first 2015 compound is the one we have for a treatment of erectile dysfunction. Then we acquired the option for what we call 2018, or it's AN788. It's a compound that we have an option agreement on from Saniona. I'll get back to that in a minute. Then we also have a product for depression, and we also have one for neuropathic pain. The two last ones are still in preclinical development. That means we have a lot of preclinical animal data on these, but we're still exploring where to drive these forward the most, and we are seeking partnership for these. And actually, as of today, when I leave this meeting, I'll be outside for a few minutes, and then I'll be flying to the US to participate in the BIO, which is the Tinder within, you can say, science and the pharma industry. It will take place in Philadelphia, where actually there's all the pharma companies of the world are present and looking for assets. So there's going to be exciting times coming up. So we actually have a pipeline with, you can say, preclinical assets, and we also have some phase 2 ready assets, and we are soon to be a phase 2 asset with our own EP 2015 in conditions with a high unmet need. So the option deal from Saniona. So the compound that we acquired from Saniona is what we call a phase 2 ready asset. It's already been through a phase 1, so it's been through the safety and tolerability study previously, and that also means that actually the compound is already synthesized. So that means the powder or the tablet that we're going to give to the patients is produced. So it means that we do not need to go back and spend a lot of money on producing this product. So it is actually ready to use. We have a 1-year exclusive option agreement on this with no upfront payments. We only have to take on the cost of the patent cost for the patent, the running patent for this. And actually, we want to reposition. And when I say reposition, so it is a novel drug, but we want to use it for a different indication than what it was actually intended for originally. It was intended for anxiety. And we actually think now that we have enough good data in our preclinical models to take it into another indication. We have not yet disclosed this, but we'll do that very shortly. So it is actually, I think it's a very nice indication, and I think, again, it is for high unmet need, and it's actually driven a lot by the patients. So it's interesting times coming up with this compound. And also here, just like we have done with the 2015 compound, we can actually run what we call a fairly simple phase 2. When I say fairly simple, is that we can actually conduct a phase 2 over 5, 6, 8 weeks, depending on between the two cohorts that we dose. So actually, it's not a duration like you see with cancer or Alzheimer's, where you have maybe 1 or 2 years clinical trials before you get the result. Here, you get the result really fast. And this we can also do in this indication we're looking at here. And of course, we need to finance this somehow, and we are looking for partnerships for this one. We are out speaking to partners if they have an interest in this. And of course, we are trying to apply for some soft funding as well. So actually, we think this is a unique opportunity to strengthen the pipeline and also broaden the scope of Initiator Pharma. We still remain in the family of compounds that we are working with. So actually, you can still say the compounds that we are doing is all what we call monoamine reuptake inhibitors. So that means that they bind to a specific family of proteins in the brain. And this is the same in this asset. So we're exploiting our experience with this. So again, what is it? The main project we have? Well, it's a treatment of erectile dysfunction. And normally I show a slide of a Viagra tablet at the same time, because a lot of people, they think that there's, is there really a need for treatment of erectile dysfunction? And there is, and I have a few slides, and some of you might have seen them before, but there's actually a lot of evidence and a lot of support that there's a high unmet need for these patients. So we know that the number of patients are increasing, and one of the reasons why we see more and more people suffering from EDs is a lot to do with lifestyle. It's more people suffering from diabetes, it's obesity, and also that people are getting older and remain sexually active for longer. We know that ED occurs with age, so the older you get, the higher the likelihood you will encounter ED. So then saying that, and we know that from a lot of surveys, that Danish and Swedish and Belgium and Portuguese men and women are sexually active much longer than they used to be. And it's been a big shift over the last 10 years. And this is also driving up the numbers. So there will actually be more than 300 million people suffering from ED out there. Not all of these receive treatment, of course. It's about 20 million, 21 million in the US get prescriptions for ED, and it's about the same in Europe. So looking at the current prescription of drugs out there. So here I put a technical term called PD5 inhibitors. And PDE5 inhibitors are a specific class of chemistry that targets a specific enzyme in the body. And so you can say independently of the tablet you're using, whether it's a Viagra or Cialis or Levitra, it all inhibits the same protein or enzyme in the body. It's different chemistry, they have different, how often you need to take the tablets, but they all have what we call the same mechanism of action. And we look at asking if people are satisfied with the current treatment. You ask them global assessment questions. And this is a questionnaire that is used for all patients. And we see here that if you look at ED overall, 82% is happy with the current treatment. But in ED, we actually have a more specific questionnaire we ask them, and that's called the sexual encounter profile. And in the sexual encounter profile, there's questions related more directly to the ability to get an erection and sustain an erection that is good enough for fulfilling an intercourse. And here we see a decrease in the satisfaction with the PD5 inhibitors. If we then push to a segment of patients suffering from ED, people suffering from diabetes at the same time. So we see here, we're seeing patients, actually diabetic patients, they also have a much larger likelihood of suffering from ED. And we see here, if you ask the same questions again in a global assessment question, 56% is not happy with the current treatment. And if you go to the more specific questions, less than half of the patients are satisfied with the current treatment. So overall, this gives satisfaction with the current treatment or lack of treatment. Like 30 to 40 are non-responders to the current treatment. And remember the numbers I mentioned before, out of 300 million, we had 30 to 40 are non-responders. And again, out of the 40 million in the US and Europe combined, 30 to 40 is not responding. So we're actually talking about a lot of patients here. So this is a clear medical need for there's a clear medical need for the non-responders. So I will talk about non-responders. So this is our target. We're not competing with Viagra or Levitra or Cialis. We are targeting a group of patients that do not get current relief. So you can say, what is being done today? Well, there's different ways to do it. I'll skip a little bit through, but you can work on using different PD5 inhibitors. You can increase the concentration that you use. But as I said before, if you change from one product to another, it's still the same mechanism of action. So that's most of the time not going to help you a whole lot shifting to that. Then you can not some cases we can do a penile implant, so you insert a piece of plastic that you can pump up to get the erection. And then there's a second or third line treatment, which is Cavijet and Muse, where you either have to inject yourself with a syringe or place a tablet into the uterus. So it's a fairly painful applications, both of them. And we actually see that 40 to 50% of the patients using these products drop out after 3 years. And it's really important to mention with these third line treatment or second line treatment that these will you will get an erection that is not stimulated. So that means if you inject yourself, you will get an erection no matter what happens. So it's not based on stimuli. And that's also a disadvantage of this treatment. So there's no optimal treatment out there for these patients. So the mechanism of action of our compound, so I talked about it was a little bit different from what we saw with the PD-5 inhibitors. But first, maybe a little bit of science, and I love to show a little bit of science, but being a scientist myself. But here we have a schematic drawing of a neuron in the brain. And what happens when in the neuron, when it gets a stimuli on the neuron, we get an increase of calcium, which drives the release of dopamine. Dopamine is a signaling molecule, which probably a lot of you heard about, related to a lot of diseases. But upon release of dopamine into the synaptic cleft between the neuron and the postsynaptic cell, then you have more dopamine coming out there, where it can bind to the receptors of the dopamine. And that starts a downstream cascade of signaling. We'll get back to that. So the way that dopamine again is cleared away from this cleft, so the way we stop the signaling is actually by an active transport of the dopamine back into the neuron so it can be reused, recycled for another activation. And this is done by here, you can see the red arrow, it's called the dopamine transporter. So it's an active transport of dopamine that clears the synaptic cleft. And this is actually the target for our compound. So our compound inhibits the reuptake of dopamine. And of course, if you have a release of dopamine and you prevent it from being reuptaken, you will increase the presence of dopamine in the synaptic cleft, and thereby you will get a prolonged activation of the receptors on the postsynaptic cell. So how does this relate up to erection? Well, we know erection is driven by stimuli. So I talked about the stimuli is important, and stimuli could be being touched, seeing something nice or smelling something. But it could also be your imagination, something you remember, you recall a good memory. And all of this is actually processed in the brain to a release of dopamine. So this is the connection to our target here. So you get a release of dopamine. So again, this is the normal way you actually starting an erection. And what we do here, then you can say that when inhibiting the pump, we make sure that this signal gets stronger. So this is what we do. And actually, we know that besides that, we have a dual mechanism of action. So we know that we are not only working in the brain, strengthening the natural erection response, but we actually also strengthening what we call the peripheral response. And that's because dopamine is not only, or dopamine transporters are not only located in the brain, but also in the peripheral tissue. So we also see an effect there. So we are actually strengthening what we call the natural erection response. And this is very important for the patient. Again, here is a big differentiator to some of the other compounds, the PD-5 inhibitors. And I'll show you in the next slide what some of the differences. Here I made a schematic representation, and on the y-axis we measure pressure. So this is pressure in penile tissue. And then you see in the beginning, the first peak you see the EFS is a test where we just make sure that there's a connection between the nerve and the penile tissue. Then we add our compound, and you see after duration about 10 minutes you start getting these spontaneous erections in a rat model. A rat model that very much resembles what happens in men. And we see that when we give the drug, we get an increase of the pressure in the carpus carcinom, which is the penile tissue. So if you do the same with a PD-5 inhibitor, you see we do the same control again, and then you see we use sildenafil here. You get a very, very low increase in pressure. So it does not initiate a response like our compound. And the difference I will show becomes very clear now, because actually what we see here, if you then combine it with our product, you see we get suddenly after 10 minutes we get the spontaneous erections again. But now the difference between the two graphs is that when you are using sildenafil on the side, you're kind of getting a more sustained pressure in the penile tissue. And the reason why that is actually because of the mechanism of action of the PD-5 compound. it cannot start an erection, but it can make sure that the erection is there for longer. And how is that occurring? Well, we know that when we drive an erection, so the release of dopamine in the brain activates a production of nitrate oxide. And that's a gas. And that gas is actually opening up for the blood vessels. And the bigger a blood vessel is, the more blood we can have flow through the blood vessel. This initiates the erection in the men. The PD5 inhibitor, so the target that it targets, is actually making sure that we get back to a resting state. So when you give a PD5 compound, you're actually making sure that you don't get this relaxation again. So you make sure that the duration and the opening of the artery is there for longer, so you get a longer duration of the erection. So that is the big difference between we can initiate an erection response by strengthening the natural erection mechanism, whereas the PD5 inhibitors are prolonging a natural occurring erection. So this is very different, and this is also the technical reason why we are not competing against the current marketed drugs. So we are driving towards a clinical proof of concept. We did the preclinical safety, and we did the efficacy in models that resembles ED, which is actually very translatable to men. The compound is synthesized. We are getting to the end of our phase 1 study, and we will come up with a press release as soon as we have dosed and made sure that the last patient is safe out of the ward. And then we're actually preparing for the clinical proof of concept phase 2A study as we speak. And if you look at the Max site, you see there is actually the advertisement is up for recruiting of patients. So we are at the final preparations, and we're looking forward to what's going to happen in the next few weeks and months. So just a little bit on the development line here. We are on the phase 1. We are coming to the end of that. Then we'll go into the phase 2, which will be a randomized double-blind crossover study. So that means that we will have patients, the same patients will be dosed twice, either with placebo or with active, and then there will be a washout period in between, so we use them as their own control. And we will look for clinical endpoint. We will look for erection with the Regiscan, and then we will look for CNS safety as we speak. And when we have the proof of concept, we will continue our deal-making progress. And you can say, so what is actually going on, you can say, in the deal-making process? Yeah, we are traveling around, meeting a lot of the companies that has an interest in this. And actually, you can say, who's the companies who's interested? Well, people, of course, in men's health, that has a sales fall already. So there could be people with PD5 inhibitor products already on the market. But it's also just in general companies that are looking for opportunities in fields where they see an unmet need. So it's actually really interesting times right now, and I hope that with the clinical data, with the phase 1 data, will be the first really good triggering point for many of the dialogues that we have, and of course having the proof of concept will be even more so. We have financing in place for taking us all the way through the clinical trials and into Q 2020. So in that respect, we have money to make sure that we get this deal landed, or a partnership. So we are coming, as I said, to the end of the phase 1, and we will get back with an update on the phase 1 as soon as we have it. So I touched briefly upon what is going to be the position in the competitive profile of our drug. Well, I think we'll be launched as first line of treatment for non-responders. It is an oral tablet compared against the injectables. And actually, we also believe that there could be a considerable off-label use compared to the PD5 inhibitors. And why do I say that? We know that a lot of the side effects from PD5 inhibitors are nausea. It's on the vision, and it also, in some cases, even give up to vomiting. So we think that our compound actually has a better safety profile for what we have seen so far in the clinic. And therefore, we actually think that we could steal a bit of the market of the current PD5 inhibitors. Even though it's generic now in most places, we still think that people will pay the premium pricing for going to a drug that feels better. It's very limited what is actually in the pipeline, so we don't see a whole lot of competition out there for our type of patients. The next speaker is Initiator Pharma. It has a very nice way to administer the PD5 inhibitors, and that will work very well for the responders. But for the non-responders, there's nothing out there. So we can see that what is coming is not for the patients that we are looking at. We are looking at from mild to moderate to severe ED patients. And there's a lot of things in the pipeline for the mild one, but none of them have proven very efficacious at this stage. So we are fairly comfortable with our positioning there. So this will be a first-in-class all administered for the PD5 non-responders, and this is very unique, and it's very, very attractive when we speak to the pharma companies that they say, so you really have something there. So a little bit about the people who's behind. Of course, you've seen me a number of times. I think the two people who deserve the most credit right now is Michael Thompson and Ulf Simonsen, who's actually in charge of the phase 1 trial. So they're running it together with Mac, and they keep on making sure that we are on the right track and delivering results as we have promised. And they are, I would say that they're, as today, are also working really hard, and we hope that all the expertise will at the end will show that we actually have something that's really, really nice and good in the clinical trials. On the management side, you can say, or on the board, we have Magnus Persson, a very experienced medical doctor from Stockholm, actually, who's involved with a number of companies and also listed here in Sweden. So, in summary, we have a first-class drug addressing an unmet need. And you can say that the peak sales we have estimated to be between 1.2 to 3 billion US a year. So we are actively seeking and finding a license or sell or enter a strategic partnership with a big pharma for this novel treatment. And then we are seeking partners or soft funding for our pipeline of the other assets that we have. So I think we are here on the brink of solving a high unmet medical need. And we're looking forward, and there's going to be a very eventful summer coming up with the completion now of the phase 1 and getting the phase 2A readout from a fairly short phase 2 trial. So with this, I would say thank you very much, and please feel free to ask questions here in the audience or afterwards at the private table.
Tack så mycket. Competitors. You mentioned a little bit about it, but are there really competitors trying to do what you are aiming to do, or can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so of course we don't know everything that's going out there if it's not published, but we can say what we look at what's being published, that none is using the same mechanism that we're using. So nobody's trying to mimic what we are doing. We can see that there's some companies trying to take some of the injectables, trying to make them into gels that you can apply directly to the penis. But I think this will, first of all, only work for very mild ED, and also it's not a natural stimuli, so it's not based on the stimulation of your partner. No. So it's just something you start, and then there's the cross-contamination factor, which I think nowadays is something we have to take very serious. You apply something to yourself, and then you fulfill the intercourse afterwards. So you will transmit some of the gel to the partner.
To the partner, yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, I don't see a lot of competition. No.
Okay. The problem that you are addressing, is it spoken about openly in all parts of the world? You mentioned the US, you mentioned Europe. Do you see a potential, equal potential in Asia, for example, or is it more of a taboo to discuss these kind of problems there?
I think that actually, what I've experienced in Sweden, for example, people are very open. In Denmark, we're actually a bit more restricted. In the US, if you have been into US recently, you will see every second ad block has an ED, for a man running around with an older woman, and they say we have a happy life. So I think in the US you talk a lot about it, but that only stays at that level. So I think I don't see the taboo that many places, and we definitely see Asia. Korea is really coming after this. Korea is doing a lot of studies in ED. There, it's a little bit more taboo to discuss that you have it yourself, but there's no taboo discussing it in general. But
you can assist others, but
it's kind of like I know somebody who is suffering from this. So and I think in Sweden and Denmark, a lot of people, they will be a lot more up front with it.
Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience here? No. Okay. You said you're already now looking for partners. Do you need a lot of more evidence before these discussions become more involved, or going deeper down, or becoming more serious, or do you have enough already now in order to feel comfortable that yes, we can carry out these kind of discussions?
I think that we are carrying out the discussion, so whether we are confident or not is always a question. But I think that we have something that is very novel. We have a new mechanism of action. We have really good preclinical data. And then I think that the question we often get, is it safe? And this is what we are getting to now with the completion of the phase 1. Then we have the data saying it is actually safe. And the reason why is that this question is of course asked is because we are working in the central nervous system. And there, of course, you know from many clinical trials there is a risk. But we actually see in our clinical phase 1 trial that we are well tolerated drug. So that is good. So that's a first step, but of course they would like to see the final report. But of course the efficacy is the key driver for going. But we are discussing and we'll keep on showing the data as we can when it's being generated. Yeah.
Okay. Talking about that, there are lots of discussion going on, I know, in the market among investors and different opinions, and they are debating whether what you're going to present in the near future. Milestones. You mentioned a few of them, but can you elaborate a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, and as I said, it's going to be a really eventful year because I think that fairly soon we will finish the phase 1, and with the completion of that, I think we are shown that it is a tolerable and safe drug that we are working with. And of course, thinking back when we started the original dosing, there's always this. We had this incident at the very first sentinel dosing, and people maybe are still feeling they're uncomfortable with this. I think we move far and clear away from that now, and that we will do and demonstrate that even further by completing the phase 1 and going into the phase 2. So I think that's the first one, and of course the start of the phase 2, the first dosing of the patient in the phase 2 is really important. It's a big milestone for a lot of companies, especially also for ours. And then we will run the study, and when that is completed, when the last patient is out, then we are of course looking forward to getting the data processed and coming out with a public announcement of the proof. Okay. So I think there's going to be, so we say just on the ED 2015 compound, there's going to be 2 really nice press releases coming out, with the phase 1 and the phase 2, and then it's just
I see
what happens.
Yeah. You said that you are, after the meeting here today, you're leaving for the US.
Yeah.
And what's the purpose of that trip?
So that's a big bio event called Bio 2019 in Philadelphia, and it's where pharma companies from all over the world are coming together to meet and discuss. And it's a lot of the partners we're already talking to are there, and you just a catch-up meeting, and you kind of brief them on what's going on, and they see what else is going on. And they might ask questions just like you. What do you think about this compound? Would this be something that could be a competitor to you, or do you see maybe a benefit of putting some of this together? And so this is an ongoing discussions with a lot of partners. They all want to make sure it fits into their pipeline and their project. Okay. So we're trying to be as attractive as possible. And of course it's not something you do overnight, so it takes a number of times, and you have to be persistent, going back many times.
Of course. You mentioned you showed the ownership, the structure, and I noticed that you yourself, you're among one of the major owners. And there are a few others. Do you meet them on a regular basis?
So
do you discuss with them?
I meet them. Some of the larger ones I meet at meetings like this. They come up and afterward, and also the smaller ones. They come and we get emails from stockholders who are shareholders who are asking questions, and I try to answer to the best of the ability we can within the rules of being a listed company.
Exactly.
So I think that we have a good dialogue, and I always encourage people coming if they have something that they're not unsure about, because I would like to explain what we can, especially about the mechanisms and so on that we have. So I think it's good to have a dialogue with your shareholders, and we see many of the bigger shareholders have been with us from the beginning, and that is always nice that you see that believe in the future of the company and they believe in what we have delivered so far.
Okay. Tack så mycket, Claus.
Tack.